and very good to see a few familiar faces on the call. Ken, Sarah, and Casey, thank you for inviting me to speak today. My name is Raed Jarrar. I work with Dawn, the organization that was founded by the late Jamal Khashoggi. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. And I'll speak a little bit about, not specifically about what's going on in Israel-Palestine, although I am a Palestinian American myself. I think my colleagues on the panel covered in detail what's going on in Gaza and in Israeli prisons. But I think the angle that I would like to focus on here is the United States' responsibility for what's going on. We're not audiences watching violations committed by a foreign government. The United States is an active participant in the violations that are happening in Israel. And I say that for a few reasons. One reason is that the United States continues to provide Israel with the aid and political support despite all of these reported violations. And some of the United States aid actually ends up supporting violations against Palestinian citizens. That's not something that is discussed on a daily basis, but the U.S. provides Israel with billions of dollars of foreign military financing. Israel is the number one recipient of foreign military financing. And unlike most other countries in the world, Israel gets a chunk of that foreign military financing in the form of cash. It's called the Overshore Procurement Account. Historically, it was at 26.3%, so around a quarter of the entirety of the funding. Now it's supposed to taper off to zero by 2028. So we're at around 18% of the entirety of the funding that there's there. So there are a few $1 billion that are given to Israel as cash to subsidize its own weapons, its own operations. And that's why I think any violation, and that is a big statement that I'm making here, but any violation that is committed by the Israeli forces is somehow subsidized by the United States because of the vast nature of our aid to Israel, because of the cash nature of our support to Israel. So that's why violations committed in these prisons can and should be traced back to U.S. funding, and that should technically trigger a few U.S. laws that prohibit the United States from funding certain acts of those violations of human rights and other violations of war crimes, etc. So we look at like the violations that happen in Gaza during the ongoing genocide. They're massive, and there are a lot of U.S. regulations and laws that should kick in to prevent the U.S. from sending additional weapons. These, include laws that apply when we sell weapons to Israel, laws that apply when we give weapons to Israel, and some policies that the administration has had for itself. Like, for example, the Biden administration's own policy on conventional arms transfer prohibits giving any weapons to countries if the weapons would be used in acts of genocide. The Arms Export Control Act applies to all foreign military sales that we give to Israel. The Foreign Assistance Act, FAA, applies to all money that we give to Israel, to foreign military financing that we give to Israel. But I do want to focus in the remaining of my time on two aspects that are very, very solid, very, very binding that the U.S. has been ignoring. This is according to a less known amendment to the Foreign Assistance Act, referred to as the Leahy Law. It's Amendment 620M of the Foreign Assistance Act. The United States is not supposed to give weapons to any foreign unit engaged in certain kinds of violations of human rights. And these violations of human rights are usually forced that the U.S. looks into under that law, extrajudicial killing, and politically motivated rape, and then torture, and the last one is enforced disappearance. So when we talk about the issue of Palestinian prisoners, there are two extremely important points here related to the Leahy Law implementation. Torture which, there are alarming reports of torture that have been covered by the New York Times, CNN, and other mainstream outlets. Some of it dwarfs the torture and violations committed by the United States in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, other prisons around the world. There are alarming reports of, enforced, arrests and this enforced disappearance, arrests without due process that are taking place in Gaza and the West Bank as well at massive scale. These are not things that happen on the side. This is like administrative detention and arresting Palestinians with no due process is literally a part of how Israel conducts its business. So the fact that we have these two, allegations going on with a lot of evidence requires the United States to step in immediately. This is an actual requirement, not an optional, discretionary issue. The United States should step in immediately to investigate cases of torture, of enforced disappearance, of extrajudicial killing, and other cases that I mentioned, to make sure that the U.S. Money is not contributing to this. Now, organizations like mine and many others have informed the State Department and the U.S. government overall of these violations for decades. This is not something that started after October 7th. And the United States has never in its history applied laissez law to Israel. We have not suspended U.S. aid to a single Israeli unit in the history of the U.S. and Israel, which is mind-boggling. Like, imagine the number of violations that have been committed by Israel. Imagine the number of documented violations that have been conveyed to the U.S. State Department. Not a single unit has been suspended in Israel. That's what I want to say today. Like, when we look at the violations by Israel against Palestinian prisoners, they are horrific. There is damning evidence that Israel commits these on a daily basis, but this is not an Israel-only problem. This is an Israel and U.S. problem. The United States is an active participant in every crime that is committed by Israel against the Palestinians. And the United States is violating our own laws to maintain the flow of U.S. funding to Israeli units that have been committing these violations. So while we talk about this, I think, talking about how Israel is bad, etc., is important. But I think bringing it back home here and telling our own government in the U.S. that we have to apply our own laws and stop funding Israel as a whole, or at least at a minimum, stop funding Israeli units involved in these violations, is a must. Let me stop here.